Economic Policy Subcommittee hearing on the student loan crisis. When we held our first hearing on this subject in April, I emphasized that the economic crisis caused by the pandemic and the pause on student loan payments increased the urgency to fix the program and to provide relief for millions of borrowers. 3 months later, the student loan program is at a crossroads, and we should take advantage of the opportunity to make real change. The pause on student loan payments, interest, and collections that was put in place at the beginning of the pandemic is set to expire in about 2 months. This pause has shown how important it is to eliminate student debt. For some borrowers, the pause meant that they didn't have to choose between food, rent, and paying student loan debt. For millions more, the pause gave them a chance to pay off other debt or even to put some savings aside. This was good for borrowers and good for our economy. Now, the president should make these benefits permanent by using his authority to forgive $50,000 in student loan debt for all borrowers. In the meantime, it is critical that the administration extend the payment pause, which is currently set to expire on September 30th. Earlier this month, I released the results of an investigation that found that student loan servicers were not ready for this pause to end. They need more time to connect with borrowers and more time to staff up to handle the needs of borrowers during the transition. And they are still waiting on important guidance from the Biden administration. Now, there's a new set of complications that will take time to unravel. 2 weeks ago, FIA, a large student loan servicer that has badly mismanaged the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, announced that they will be leaving the federal student loan program. This is good news, very good news. FIA was responsible for failures in the Public Service Loan Program that have robbed untold numbers of borrowers of the debt cancellation that they were promised. The company has a nasty record of ripping off borrowers. Since 2016, 9 different department reviews have uncovered problems with FIA's implementation of the program. FIA's problems were so extensive that they have been subject to 4 corrective action plans and 2 large fines. Despite these documented problems, when the company's CEO, James Steely, appeared at our April hearing on student loans, he told what appeared to be a bald-faced lie about FIA's loan servicing record. He insisted that FIA had never been subject to department penalties. This was absolutely not true. When we learned about the actions taken by the Department of Education against FIA, Senator Kennedy and I sent a letter to Mr. Steely asking that he clarify the record. His response, which I am releasing today, is a mix of backsliding and denial that raises more questions than it answers. Senator Kennedy and I are from different parties, and we often hold different views, but we both believe in accountability. When a corporate CEO comes before our committee to testify, we expect that person to be reasonably accurate and, if they make a mistake, to correct it as quickly as possible. Our job is oversight, and in this context, it means that we have a responsibility to respond to misinformation and outright lies and to demand accountability for anyone who provides false and misleading testimony to Congress. As FIA leaves the student loan program, that's not the only problem we need to confront. Nearly 9 million borrowers will need to be transferred to a new servicer within a few months. This is no easy task, and the administration has an important job to do to make sure that this transition happens smoothly. But this is also a rare opportunity for a fresh start and to make sure that the student loan program works the way it is supposed to. This is our best chance in years to build strong guardrails into student loan servicing contracts and to hold student loan servicers accountable if they screw things up. It is also a chance to fix the public service loan forgiveness program to make sure that our hardworking public servants get the relief that our nation promised them. I appreciate our witnesses coming here today to give us perspective on how to make sure that that happens. And I'll be working closely with the Education Department to provide student loan relief and to rebuild the student loan system so that it works in the best interests of borrowers. We have great witnesses with us today. First, joining us virtually, I'm pleased to introduce the Honorable Tish James, the Attorney General for the state of New York. Attorney General James has been a fighter for student borrowers across her state, including bringing a case against FIA for its mismanagement of the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Second, we have my good friend, Ms. Randy Weingarten, the president of the American Federation of Teachers. Ms. Weingarten represents more than 1 million public school teachers, nurses, and other dedicated public servants. She is a champion for debt relief on their behalf. And lastly, we have Ms. Persis Yu, the Director of Student Loan Borrower Assistance Project at the National Consumer Law Center. Ms. Yu is an expert on the student loan system and on consumer protection, and she is a tireless fighter on behalf of borrowers. I want to thank our witnesses for being with us today, and let's begin our testimony. Attorney General James, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for allowing me to testify virtually. I truly appreciate it. My name is Letitia James, and I am the Attorney General for the state of New York. Thank you for inviting me here today to discuss the challenges facing student loan borrowers and ways to protect them. My office has significant experience protecting student loan borrowers based on our enforcement of state and federal consumer protection laws. Since 2019, we have undertaken major investigations and actions against for-profit colleges, student lenders, and student loan servicers. Our work resulted in a $9 million settlement with federal student loan servicer Conduit, formerly known as ACS, that provided relief to more than 40,000 New York borrowers, $7.5 million in debt relief to more than 900 New York students at the now defunct for-profit college ITT Tech, and a settlement with Trans World Systems, a student loan debt collector, which resulted in $600,000 in restitution and penalties. Our investigations have revealed that student loan borrowers are being harmed by the misconduct of student loan servicers. In fact, in October 2019, my office filed a lawsuit against the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency, FIA, one of the nation's largest student loan servicers, for its mismanagement of the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. This program allows individuals who work in public service, like teachers and nurses and members of the armed forces, to have their loans forgiven after making qualifying payments for 10 years. And as we allege in our lawsuit, FIA, operating under the name Fed Loan Servicing, failed these hardworking people by not accurately counting PSLF qualifying payments, failing to provide timely explanations of their determinations, and failing to inform borrowers of their options to challenge Fed Loan's mistakes. As set forth in our lawsuit, Fed Loan's inability to properly administer the program contributed to the shockingly high rate of rejection of PSLF forgiveness applications. When we filed our lawsuit, more than 98% of the applications were rejected as ineligible for forgiveness. And FIA recently announced, as you indicated, Madam Chair, that it will not be renewing its contract with the Department of Education. However, state and federal investigations have revealed its servicer misconduct extends beyond a single servicer. The widespread misconduct stems in part from the absence of comprehensive federal servicing standards. To prevent misconduct from continuing, the department should implement such standards, including requiring services to provide accurate and timely information about income-driven repayment plans and public student loan forgiveness eligibility, requiring services to act in the best interests of borrowers, imposing robust quality assurance measures, implementing mechanisms for borrowers to appeal servicer actions, requiring timely processing of borrower submissions, and penalizing servicers who violate state and federal consumer protection laws, including by reallocating the federal student loan portfolio to other servicers. In addition, the Department of Education should provide relief to borrowers who have been harmed by servicer misconduct, including by retroactively crediting public student loan forgiveness borrowers with qualifying payments. The department should also ensure that the onus is on the servicer, not the borrower, to identify and correct servicer errors. In addition, where state and federal investigations reveal systemic errors, the department should provide broad, across-the-board relief to harmed borrowers. The department should also continue its work to reverse former Secretary DeVos's action to shield federal servicers from state oversight. We applaud the department for taking steps to restore information sharing with state attorney general offices. The department should also retract the former secretary's March 2018 notice that stated the position that state consumer protection laws are preempted by federal law with respect to federal loan servicers. Retracting this ill-conceived notice will ensure that states can continue their important work to protect borrowers in our states. In addition, Congress should expand access to public student loan forgiveness to all federal loan borrowers who devote 10 years to public service, regardless of the type of federal loan or loan repayment plan. Expanding eligibility to encompass all such borrowers will provide relief to many who were victims of servicer error and will result in a fairer, more consistent, and more equitable public student loan forgiveness program. And finally, the federal government should take action to cancel a substantial amount of federal student debt. I co-led a multi-state of 17 attorneys general, urging the adoption of House and Senate resolutions that call for the cancellation of up to $50,000 in federal student debt for all federal student loan borrowers. Canceling this debt will help free borrowers burdened by loan payments and allow them to move forward with their lives, as well as help to close the racial and gender wealth gap. The student debt crisis has been exacerbated by misconduct by student loan servicers. It is imperative that we create safeguards, rail guards, as you indicated, that protect students from servicer misconduct, especially students who work and who have made a commitment to the public good benefit that all of us enjoy. My office is committed to protecting students and student borrowers in New York State and across this country. And I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you very much, General James. We really appreciate it. President Weingarten, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Senator. I think I'm on. Good afternoon. My name is Randy Weingarten. How about now? How about now? Okay, I'm going to reclaim a couple of seconds. My name is Randy Weingarten, and I'm the president of the American Federation of Teachers, and I am honored to be testifying before this committee on this topic. Our union represents 1.7 million teachers and paraprofessionals, nurses, higher education, faculty and staff, and public employees. In other words, we represent and work in the professions that make a difference in the lives of others, professions that require a college degree, which means our members have been increasingly burdened by unsustainable college debt. Over the last year and a half, Members of these very professions have done heroic work, keeping our communities up and running, caring for COVID patients, and educating our children during a school year like no other. Our teachers and school staff from pre-K through college are planning right now a full return to in-person learning, and they know they will need to make their students feel safe and welcome amid the myriad of crises that are facing the nation right now. And frankly, the survey we did with RAND Corporation this summer showed that 78% of teachers report experiencing frequent job-related stress during this pandemic, almost twice as much as other working adults. So, for now, for many of them, the looming restart of student loan payments in this fall is deeply concerning and potentially ruinous financially, as you said, Chair Warren. So I'm here on their behalf to raise these concerns, especially in light of the news that FIA will no longer service student loans. Most AFT members are eligible for PSLF, but after 3.5 years, the Education Department is still rejecting 98% of applications and has nearly 150,000 PSLF applications in backlog. What AG James just said is true across the board. The Biden administration inherited a broken system and wisely extended the pause on student debt that the Trump administration enacted. Combined, the two have effectively canceled over $90 billion in student loan interest, showing that the administration can cancel student debt. The Biden administration and the Education Department can restore the promise of PSLF right now before student loan payments resume this September and immediately discharge debts for all borrowers who have completed at least a decade of public service while paying their federal student loans. Borrowers need relief, not a mirage. They need help from a government that promised to forgive the remainder of any debt still unpaid after 10 years of payments if they went into public service. Public service work is valuable and should not lead to a lifetime of debt that force them into terrible decisions about whether to pay their loans or buy a home or raise a family. Let me give you one example in the short time I have left. Christine Conlon, a school-based occupational therapist in Staten Island, New York. For years, Christine kept detailed notes about her student loan payments, but she couldn't get FIA to reconcile its records with the evidence she repeatedly provided them. She should be just a few years away from PSLF, if not for the problem of FIA, but FIA will not. They have lied repeatedly to her, including telling her she should just give up on public service loan forgiveness. Look, the AFT has made extraordinary efforts, as you all know, to make PSLF work, including going to court to seek justice that our members need. And while servicer errors have plagued the PSLF program for years, this has become blindingly apparent during the last administration. I know, and I'm glad that the Biden-Harris administration seems primed to hold services accountable like PIA, but what we're seeing is that they are running for the doors because they know how catastrophic they have been. If the administration does not cancel student debt for public service workers before the fall, millions of them will be forced to transfer the loans that FIA currently has to new servicers, and the new servicers will inherit loans with paper trails that will never be able to be untangled. The problem is clear. The solutions are clear as well. The administration should cancel debt for all public service workers who have paid their debts for a decade and should cancel the debt of $50,000 of debt per borrower for the following reasons. These actions will make a big difference for all communities, particularly communities of color. 93% of the lowest income Black households hold student debt, and they would experience substantial relief. In fact, debt cancellation would be an immediate and long-lasting stimulus to our economy, increasing average yearly pay by $3,000 and increasing the gross domestic product by $1 trillion. We know that the Ed Department is trying, but right now is the moment to cancel up to $50,000 of debt and to do the work that we need to do to fix PSLF in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, President Weingarten. Ms. Yu, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Warren, members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify today regarding how to protect student loan borrowers in the upcoming transitions in the student loan system. My name is Persis Yu. I'm the director of the National Consumer Law Center's Student Loan Borrower Assistance Project, and I offer my testimony here today on behalf of our low-income clients of the National Consumer Law Center. Our clients and millions others like them take out student loans believing that they are the key to a better future. The vast majority of clients that I see are low-income women of color who wanted to provide a better life for their children, but are stuck instead in a cycle of inescapable debt. The student loan system is broken, has been broken for a very long time. Currently in the United States, nearly 45 million people owe more than $1.7 trillion on their student loans. Prior to the pandemic, roughly a quarter of federal loan borrowers were delinquent or in default on their loans. Racial disparities in the student loan portfolio threaten the financial security of borrowers of color, with Black and Latinx borrowers defaulting at twice the rate of their white peers. Cruelly, the communities hit hardest by the student loan crisis are also the communities hit the hardest by the pandemic. The COVID-19 payment suspension, which provided vital protections to many of our clients throughout the pandemic, is currently set to expire on September 30th, just a few short months away. And on top of this looming deadline, two of the Department of Education's loan servicers, FIA and also Grand State servicers, have announced that they will not be extending their contracts this December, meaning that roughly 10 million borrowers will need to transfer their loan servicers. Student loan borrowers, low-income and otherwise vulnerable borrowers in particular, are at significant risk during these upcoming transitions. The combination of restarting payments, along with the risks associated with large-scale loan transfers by servicers who have a long history of failing to adequately serve student loan borrowers, will have dire consequences unless meaningful consumer protections are put in place to protect these borrowers. The end of the COVID-19 payment suspension on its own poses unprecedented challenges and is fraught with risk. Historical data from the department shows that default rates typically spike following disaster-related forbearances. My clients and others like them face severe consequences if they default on their federal student loans. The punitive collection tactics, such as wage garnishment, Social Security offsets, and tax refund offsets, often push low-income households to or even over the financial brink. I've heard from hundreds of borrowers who have lost their earned income tax credits and child tax credits due to default on their federal student loans. These payments are designed to support families and lift millions of children out of poverty. But if a family has experienced student loan default, these payments may be seized in their entirety. The loss of the EITC and the CTC is devastating to my clients and their families. I've had clients unable to access stable housing. I've had clients unable to buy diapers, food, basic necessities for their children because of these offsets. Simply put, the student debt crisis was hampering our family's economic stability even before the pandemic. Notably, there are already approximately 9 million borrowers in default on their student loans. The department should immediately remove these borrowers from default. Otherwise, they will be subject to the government's draconian collection powers as soon as the suspension ends. As the department restarts payments for tens of millions of student loan borrowers, high-quality servicing is paramount. Getting borrowers into an affordable income-during payment plan, or IDR, will be particularly important for ensuring borrower success. But starting repayment while also simultaneously transferring roughly 10 million borrowers will make this goal nearly impossible. The consequences of this massive and imminent transfer will impact all borrowers in this department's loan portfolio. The remaining servicers will need to rapidly staff up and train a whole cadre of customer service representatives in a very short amount of time in order to absorb the accounts of nearly a third of the direct loan portfolio. At a time when two major changes are occurring for student loan borrowers, borrowers need the best servicing possible. Instead, they will likely encounter inexperienced customer service representatives and servicers who are stretched too thin. Even in ordinary circumstances, errors in student loan servicing are common and often result in borrowers missing out on relief programs or on qualifying payments for IDR or PSLF. These mistakes cause borrowers to pay more and for a longer period of time. Fairness and justice require that these borrowers have the ability to enforce their rights when breached by servicers and obtain adequate remedies. Policymakers must also recognize that for many borrowers, the harm from a bungled transition will come on top of years, if not decades, of financial distress and dreams postponed as a result of our broken student loan system. Widespread administrative debt cancellation is needed now. The student loan system has failed borrowers for too long. In addition to widespread administrative debt cancellation, the department should clear the books of borrowers who are unlikely to ever repay their debts and automatically provide relief to all of the borrowers who are already entitled to cancellation under law. In addition to providing much needed relief to these borrowers, if done prior to the restart of repayments, these steps will eliminate the debts of many of the hardest to reach borrowers and will allow servicers to dedicate their resources to ensuring the success of the remaining borrowers. Thank you for the close attention you are paying to protecting student loan borrowers in the upcoming transitions, and for the opportunity to provide this testimony. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate all of your testimony here. So I now yield to myself for 5 minutes of questions. The first hearing that we held in this subcommittee just a few months ago focused on student loan servicers. These are the private companies that manage student loans for the federal government. During that hearing, I asked the CEO of FIA, one of the largest servicers in the country, whether the Department of Education had ever penalized his company in any way for its blatant mismanagement of the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, or PSLF. He told me, quote, "No, they have not." But it turns out that wasn't true. After the hearing, the Department of Education sent Senator Kennedy and me a letter detailing the multiple penalties FIA has faced. So Senator Kennedy and I wrote to FIA CEO asking him why he had lied to Congress. 2 weeks later, FIA announced they would be quitting the student loan program when their contract expires in December. Attorney General James, your office has had multiple dealings with FIA, including suing them for mismanaging the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Based on what you've seen in New York, are you sorry to see FIA quit the student loan program?
I think FIA's exit is an opportunity for a fresh start. As we allege in our lawsuit, FIA failed the teachers, the nurses, the social workers, those who serve us in the military, by failing to accurately count these qualifying payments, failing to provide timely explanations of their determinations, failing to inform borrowers of their options to challenge their mistakes. Public workers who fulfill their obligations to the public should be able to get the debt relief they earn. And we are hopeful that the Department of Education will work with our office and other state and federal partners to ensure that in the future that the Public Student Loan Forgiveness Program fulfills its promise. Our case, as you know, is in the midst of discovery, and we will continue our litigation and hopefully get the relief that countless number of borrowers so desperately need, not only in New York, but all across this country.
Thank you. You know, I think we all know what happened here. FIA realized that Congress and the Department of Education and the attorneys general were finally starting to hold them accountable for cheating borrowers and lying about it, so they turned and ran. I'm glad they're gone. All 8.5 million of the accounts that FIA currently handles now must be turned over to the student loan servicers. Ms. Yu, did the contract that FIA has with the Department of Education have any requirements in it obligating FIA to protect borrowers if they suddenly decided to quit?
The contracts provide no meaningful requirements to borrowers in the case that they suddenly decide to quit. And importantly, they do not provide the meaningful relief to the borrowers if they get harmed, as indicated by General.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. The department is currently negotiating with FIA over what they need to do when FIA walks away. What specifically do you think the Department of Education should require from FIA to make sure that student loan borrowers aren't hurt even more during the transition to a new servicer?
Well, first of all, we need to learn from the lessons of the transfer from ACS a number of years ago. We need to learn that borrowers must have complete and full payment histories, and that includes the payment histories from prior servicers as well as the payment histories when the borrower was with FIA. They need to also transfer any records of complaints, any information where borrowers may have disputes about the loan system as well. And we need to be proactive about identifying vulnerable borrowers who might get lost in this transfer. But critically, we need to understand that inevitably some borrowers will get harmed in this transfer, and we need to make sure that we have adequate remedies available to those borrowers.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. You know, President Weingarten made the point that if FIA has done such a bad job of accounting for the loan payments that people have been making, expecting them suddenly to have 100% compliance when they make the transition and they're not even going to stay in the business is pretty unrealistic. I thought you made a very powerful point about that. Look, our student loan system is broken more than just FIA. I've been saying for years that the Department of Education needs to do more to hold all student loan servicers accountable when they break the law or when they hurt borrowers. And for years, the excuse has been that there is no alternative to working with these incompetent companies because there's no plan for how to get by without them. Contracts get renewed year after year after year with no accountability and no consequences for bad behavior, and zero provisions about what the companies would do if they went under or if they walked away. When the federal government props up companies like that, that is the definition of too big to fail. Now, in December, all of our servicer contracts will be up for renewal, not just FIA's, but all of them, which means that right now the Department of Education is negotiating over what conditions these companies will have to agree to in order to keep making money off the student loan borrowers. Ms. Yu, what would loan servicing contracts with real teeth to protect our students look like?
Yeah, thank you for your question. There needs to be real penalties for poor performance and abusive practices, and the department needs to proactively look for those and do screenings. But the department also needs to get out of the way of state attorneys general, like General James, and for private borrowers who are seeking relief using state consumer protection laws. They need to rescind the notice on preemption that Attorney General James mentioned before, but also prevent servicers from raising defenses such as preemption or derivative sovereign immunity, which are intended to shield them from liability and prevent them from giving borrowers real relief.
Thank you. We need to get control of our broken loan servicing system so that we never end up in this situation again. Right now, the incentives in the servicers' contracts aren't strong enough to get them to change their behavior, and the penalties are nothing more than a slap on the wrist when the companies injure student loan borrowers. We have an opportunity over the next year to write new rules that will tell servicers that if they do a great job servicing the borrowers, then they'll be rewarded. And if they mislead the borrowers or break the law, then they're out. That's fair for everyone. I now recognize Senator Reed for his questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and welcome to witnesses. I must first recognize one of the AFT attendees, Sarah Tamelio. I first met Sarah more than 30 years ago when she was in grammar school. She was handing out brochures for Jack Reed at a polling place at Parkview Junior High School in Cranston, Rhode Island. Nice to see you again. And because of you, I'm here, and I don't blame you. I don't blame you. This is absolutely critical, and the chair has raised a number of important issues. One legislative initiative I've been working on for years is to have those lenders with high default rates share the cost on a graduated basis, which I think will ensure that they're provide sort of loans for education that will lead to real jobs and real pay and the ability to pay back the loans. That's just one aspect. That might even be in the contract, I hope, negotiations that are going in now. But one other area, and I thought I'd get President Weingarten's comments on this is the educator pipeline. We need more educators. We have to have legislation that addresses this program, that touches capacity at the lower levels of communities, states, et cetera. One of the ideas we're talking about is doubling or increasing the Teach grant to $8,000 per year and making it easier for educators to complete and get their credit. As you've talked about, we have to make loan forgiveness simpler. I believe it should be not at the end of 5 or 10 years, but it should be progressive throughout your period of time, so that in fact you can see some real tangible benefits early in terms of a commitment to public service. And any comments, President Weingarten?
Thank you, Senator. So there are many things that could help solve the problems of how do we recruit and retain people in public service, people in teaching. And the Teach grants are part of that. The doubling of Title I, Senator Van Hollen has had this great idea about the PACT Act in terms of how you increase both Title I and IDEA in a way that schools with kids with special needs or schools with kids who are poor or impoverished, they have they have an understandable and tangible federal investment that you can count on over multiple years. So you change the conditions in schools, and people want to be in those schools. Parents want to send their kids there, teachers want to teach there, kids thrive there. So there's lots of different ways to try to recruit and retain over the long period of time. The dilemma right now is that with the pause ending essentially in less than 2 months, what is happening is that there's going to be this jolt on people, and none of the changes that were supposed to be made to make PSLF more functionable, more available, they haven't happened yet. So you're going to have people who are all of a sudden going to be paying $400, $500, $800, $1,000 a month at the same time as all of these existing problems still exist. So, and at the same time as they're going back to school for the first time with a Delta variant and things like that. So that's why this urgency right now is so important in the short term, as well as then dealing with your ideas for residencies, your ideas for how we recruit and retain, including the Teach grants for the longer term.
Thank you very much. And just a quick slight detour, I think very slight. School infrastructure is one of the major issues that I've been trying to advance in our various proposals for Rebuild America. Just a quick comment, President Weingarten. The schools in most communities are old and need a lot of work, and if we don't provide the resources, it goes to your point about why would a child want to go to a place that just doesn't work. And some of our communities that keep the windows open all winter and children coach so they could just stay in the classroom. I presume that you would strongly support this effort.
I would strongly support this effort. Let me just give you this one example of this amazing school in New York City. Martin Luther King High School. The ventilation system never worked. Never worked. And with the CARES Act money that you helped get us, we were able to work with the private sector to figure out why the ventilation system didn't work. This school was built in the 1970s. I was the president of the Teachers Union in New York City for 10 years. I could not get the ventilation system to work. The CARES Act money, the work with a focus on ventilation, you walk into that school now, you can breathe. I'm an asthmatic. I could breathe with a mask on. Could you imagine what that means for the thousands of kids who go into that school? And that's the kind of work that we need all throughout the country. 2/3 of the country has ventilation systems in schools that are not appropriate. We need that money for infrastructure. It will create jobs, it will help kids breathe, and it will help us have a safe return to schooling this fall.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Reed. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for holding another hearing on this important issue, and thank you to all our witnesses for your efforts to make sure that we ultimately uphold the promise of the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And President Weingarten, thank you for mentioning the Keep Our Promises to America's Children and Teachers Act. With your help, we'll get it over the finish line, and I was pleased to see the President's budget requests for both Title I and for IDEA. We need to make sure that's something that stays with us over the years. So, I represent a state where we have lots of folks who are engaged in public service, either federal employees, of course, like other state employees, lots of nonprofit professionals, and they all were hoping to be beneficiaries of this program, this loan forgiveness program for public service, when they embarked on those careers, only to find out in many circumstances that they were at a dead end for various reasons. And we've all heard the very startling figure of the 98% denial rate, and we've got to turn that around. Attorney General James, thank you for all your efforts with respect to FIA and your lawsuit against FIA. Where do you think we can go from here in terms of remedy, and what administrative actions can the Biden administration take to help supply a remedy?
Well, hopefully going forward, as they renew these contracts with the servicers, again, requiring services to provide accurate and timely information about income-driven repayment plans and eligibility, requiring servicers to act in the best interest of borrowers and not the services themselves, imposing robust quality assurance measures, implementing mechanisms to borrowers to appeal servicer actions, streamlining the process is so critically important. Staffing up is important, requiring a timely processing of their submissions of the applications, and again, penalizing servicers who violate state and federal law is so critically important. But also just expanding the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program to other federal student loan borrowers would also be helpful. It's important to note that there are 45 million student loan borrowers in this country. We are only second consumer loans to mortgages. And it's really critically important that we help Americans and that we ensure that these servicers are working in the best interest of borrowers. And that is so critically important. Lastly, as was mentioned by my colleagues, we need to extend the pause period, particularly during this epidemic. And as we face new dangers, it's important that individuals have an opportunity to get back on track, and that individuals are put in a position so that they can pay back their debt in a fashion and in a manner and at a time when it's most appropriate to them.
Well, thank you for your good work in this area. And Ms. Yu, thank you in the National Consumer Law Center for the work that you've been doing. And I saw that together with the Center for Responsible Lending, you looked at some of the Department of Education borrowers, 428,000 plus, that were serviced by Navient, who collectively owe over $28 billion. And as I understand, the analysis showed that nearly 2/3 of these borrowers who made payments during COVID still had not been able to repay $1 of their principal. So they were underwater in that sense, and that of those, almost 90,000 borrowers owe more than 125% of their original balance now. So how much of this is due, in your opinion, to the servicer sort of malfeasance and outright negligence, and how do we fix this problem going forward?
Thank you for your question, Senator. Servicer abuses absolutely keep borrowers out of affordable repayment plans, which allow them to make progress on their student loans. One of the very common problems that we see is that servicers steer borrowers into costly deferments and forbearances, and what that does is interest continues to accrue, and then after that interest accrues, it is capitalized. So we see that not only are borrowers being charged interest, but they're being charged interest on top of interest. We've seen actions by state attorneys general, by the CFPB to hold servicers accountable for those actions. But we also need more of those actions. We need the department to take proactive steps to remedy that. But we also need to see borrowers given retroactive credit for the payments that they should have been able to make. And we need to see servicers held more accountable and to pay borrowers restitution for those harms.
Well, thank you. I look forward to working with all of you and Senator Warren, members of the committee, to try to make this right for these students and borrowers. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. Senator Smith.
Thank you so much, Chair Warren. It sounds great. And I really appreciate our testifiers here who are here today. So the student debt crisis is out of control. We know this, and we have had an opportunity to really explore it during this hearing and the last hearing we held earlier this year. And I can tell you, I hear from Minnesotans, my constituents, about this all the time, people that are struggling to carry student loan debt. This debt which is stifling their opportunity to become entrepreneurs or innovators or public servants, which is that they want to do. And this is bad. But what is worse is that borrowers who worked hard, who've made major life decisions like committing to public service, and then in return, not seeing that promised loan forgiveness that led them to make these decisions to begin with, only to find that because of some bureaucratic snafu, they aren't eligible, apparently, for student loan forgiveness at all. So this kind of debt relief would open the door for millions of Americans to have the freedom and the opportunity to build the lives that they want. And that is why it is so important that the federal government address this challenge and, I think, forgive up to $50,000 of student loan debt. Now, President Weingarten, I have heard from many Minnesotans, including, of course, many educators, about their struggles with the public service loan forgiveness program. And as I said, they've done everything they've been asked to do, only to find that the servicer tells them everything is fine until it isn't fine. After years of making payments, they discover that they're not eligible for getting their remaining student loans forgiven. So I'd like to ask you about a specific piece of this. You and I have spoken many times about the challenges of recruiting and retaining teachers, especially teachers of color. Can you tell me how you think these deep challenges with the public loan forgiveness program is affecting our challenges around recruiting and retaining teachers, and what difference it would make if we fix this?
So let me give you the example of one of the plaintiffs in a case that we have, who's a Minnesotan, Janelle Mansell, who could have had lots of other opportunities in her life. She's a math teacher. She decided to teach in the public schools of Minnesota, and she taught for 10 years, paid her student loans every month, and when it was time to get PSLF, she was given the royal runaround by her servicer and told that none of the payments qualified. Anyone who hears that story says, why would I become a teacher?
Right.
And that story just runs rampant, not only through Minnesota, but as A.G. James could tell you, through New York. A.G. Stein could tell you from North Carolina. It's why all these AGs have been out there trying to help all of us vindicate rights for people who have done everything right.
Right.
And if we're trying to attract people into our profession who don't come with a wealthy nest egg, they need the salary that they're making to actually make ends meet.
Right.
And they have this promise of PSLF, and then they're told that they can't get it. It says lots of things about government inaction. in so many different ways.
Right. Well, and it says so much about the promise of valuing teachers, the thanks that we give to teachers, but then are we going to put any beef behind that? Are we going to actually put our shoulder into demonstrating that respect and not only just talking about it?
And let me just add one more thing, which is that if this was in the financial markets and someone had a contract and that said that if you did X, you will get Y, then we get Y.
Yeah.
The fact that we have such disrespect for this contract is part of the disrespect of public service, of nurses, of firefighters, and of teachers.
Yes, yes. Thank you for that. And I want to just, I have just a couple seconds left, but I want to go to Ms. Yu to actually follow up on something. Because when Chair Warren held the earlier hearing, we heard from an individual who was struggling under student loan debt, trying to do everything that she could possibly do for her family, and just literally sinking under this debt. I can hear the sort of the challenge that some people would say here. They would essentially say, they would argue that providing student loan forgiveness to people like this it's almost like a moral hazard, that you're rewarding people for not living up to their obligations. I'm wondering, thinking about the clients that you serve, how you respond to that argument.
Thank you for your question, Senator. Look, we have a student loan system that is broken and has been holding our borrowers back. Our system gives our borrowers very few opportunities to succeed and hammers them really hard anytime that they fail. We take their wages without a court order. We take their Social Security benefits. We're taking their earned income tax credit and their child tax credits, which are designed to lift their families out of poverty. We are hammering student loan borrowers, and we are making it really hard for them to succeed.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Smith. I think that your question is right on target, that there are some who are willing to criticize people whose big sin was that they tried to get an education and now they're in financial trouble and can't pay back the student loan debt, and to hold them accountable. But then an organization like FIA that has made millions and millions of dollars off this system can't even account for the payments that have come in, which goes to President Weingarten's point. How long would a credit card company last if it wasn't accounting for the payments that came in, or a mortgage loan company, and yet these student loan servicers keep getting their contracts renewed? I think we see why FIA decided that maybe it was a new day in Washington and a new day at the Department of Education, and decided to tuck tail on this one and run. Senator Menendez, are you ready yet, or would you like me to start with Senator Ossoff? Senator Ossoff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your consistent attention to this issue. Thank you to our panelists. Ms. Weingarten, regarding public service loan forgiveness, a promise was made to America's teachers, isn't that right?
Yes, Senator.
And what was that promise?
The promise that was made, by the way, a bipartisan promise in 2007, was that in exchange for working in public service, teaching, nursing, firefighting, the Army, and paying your student loans for 10 years, the rest of those student loans would be forgiven. And it was a pretty simple promise, and it was done, as I said before, in a bipartisan way to try and make clear that the United States valued this kind of public service. And while you may not get paid what you are worth, you certainly would be able to afford the education that was required for this kind of public service.
A bipartisan promise made to America's teachers, to service members, to others who take on public service, who pay their loans diligently for a decade.
Correct.
That in exchange for that service, this bipartisan promise was the prospect of the forgiveness of the remainder of their loans at the end of that decade. Is the U.S. government making good on that promise?
No. I mean, look, the Biden administration inherited a mess. The first year that we would have seen real making good on that promise was 2017. And the former Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, made that worse, not better, and then made it hard for anyone else, including attorney generals across the country or a members union, to try to vindicate their rights, as the testimony of my colleagues have made so clear earlier today. The dilemma now is that there's such a backlog in the kind of cases that have come up to be redeemed under PSLF that no administration, as good as the Biden administration is going to be able to get through a backlog of 150,000 cases, and then on top of that, every new case that comes in every day. And so what we're seeing is we're still seeing a huge fail rate in terms of not being able to redeem this basic promise, a fail rate of about 98%.
Well, I know the chair is committed to this, and we have to make good on this bipartisan promise made to teachers and others who serve 10 years of diligent repayment, 10 years of service, that their student loan debt would be forgiven for that service. And I'm ready to work with you, Madam Chair, to take the action necessary to make that happen. I want to ask you, Ms. Yu, about college affordability. My personal belief is that you shouldn't have to take on a penny of debt to get a degree from a public college in this country, or to get a degree from an HBCU in this country. The kind of opportunity that access to public college and HBCU education without debt would make for the people of Georgia would be extraordinary, and that's why I'm advocating now that this Congress act to expand the Pell Grant program, to make higher education accessible to all Americans through our public colleges and HBCUs without debt. What kind of a difference would expansion of the Pell Grant program make, for example, to the folks the organization serves?
It would make a huge difference. We absolutely need to move away from a system of financing higher education through debt. Debt is holding back my clients. It is keeping them from being able to fulfill the promises. It also allows them to take the chance on an education, right? Like, that's one of the problems that our clients see, is that they're trying, and some of them don't succeed, and we need to lower the risks of attempting to improve your lives and make, get an education and have an opportunity to feed your family. We need to lower the risks. We need to move away from debt-financed higher education.
And Ms. Yu, expanding opportunity can also mean expanding access to skills, job training, vocational training. And just as I believe that you shouldn't have to take on debt to get a 4-year degree from a public college, I think we should be working to make access to job training and vocational skills free in this country. We have a national interest in having a highly skilled workforce, and there are so many people in Georgia and across the country for whom an HVAC certificate, a welding certificate, a commercial driving license is the ticket to a middle-class standard of living. What kind of a difference would it make in communities across this country to offer free job training and vocational training?
It would make a huge difference.
Thank you, Ms. Yu. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ossoff. Senator Menendez.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to really thank you for the incredible, fierce advocacy that you've had in this regard and the way you've used the subcommittee, and I'm pleased to be allowed to join as a member of the full committee you today. And of course, it seems to me that the best way to protect student loan borrowers is to forgive student loan debt. And I'm pleased to be working with the chairlady, Senator Schumer, and others to achieve that. But I'd like to focus on the impact of FIA, upcoming student loan service transfer, will have, in my view, and already beleaguered program, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, I think is going to be further beset by this transfer. So, Attorney General James, can you tell me any lessons that you learned from previous federal loan transfers?
Well, thank you, Senator, for that question. The last federal loan portfolio, the transfer provided valuable lessons that all of us should learn from. In 2013, the federal loan servicer known as ACS, now known as Conduit, lost its contract to service federal direct loans and transferred millions of loans to other servicers. And when ACS transferred its portfolio, many of the now servicers found that their records were missing and that ACS borrowers, their records reflected servicing errors. And as a result, some ACS borrowers, they lost credit for qualifying for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. They lost actual paperwork and documents with respect to their payments. And such losses will unfairly delay their ability to obtain forgiveness and increases the cost of their loans. And there is a risk that similar programs could arise from FIA's transfer of loans to other servicers. And it's important to note that not only FIA is transferring their loans, but there's other servicers that are considering servicing their loans to other services as the federal government reviews contracts. And to ensure that such problems do not happen in the upcoming transfer, the Department of Education, together with state and federal partners and my colleagues all across this nation, state attorney generals, we must ensure that FIA and other servicers, that they provide all the necessary and accurate and up-to-date records relating to the loans, that they ensure that new servicers audit and actively monitor accounts for any errors that might occur during or prior to transfer, that they have adequate staff to meet the demands of all borrowers, and that they ensure borrowers are not penalized for prior service errors or errors arising from the transfer. And last but not least, that the burden is not put on borrowers, but that the burden is placed on servicers. The department should apply a rebuttable presumption that payments made during the period of missing records are qualifying for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. That is so absolutely critically important. You know, as was mentioned before, Senator Warren, Chair Warren, in the previous hearing indicated how the student loan program and the amount of debt really just exasperates the racial wealth gap in our nation. And it's important that individuals understand that this wealth gap, unfortunately, is having a disproportionate impact on borrowers of color and low-income borrowers all across this nation. It's a system that has already been indicated by the chair and others, a system that is broken, that needs to be fixed as soon as possible.
Well, thank you. That was a very full answer. It took most of my time. Do you have may I have another minute or two? Oh, okay.
Take as long as you need
That
here.
spoke to many of the questions I had, so you gave me a very comprehensive answer, Madam Attorney General. So basically, ACS not only managed millions of borrowers' federal loans, but they executed the transfer poorly, and those transferred loans were riddled with missing or inaccurate information. And is it true that you found that ACS deceived borrowers concerning the availability of their PSLF opportunities?
Yeah, we're in the practice of looking at all of these loans, and our allegations include but are not limited to the fact that they engaged in deceptive business practices, Senator.
Mm-hmm. And is it true that mismanagement that you uncovered from ACS blocked consumers from obtaining the forgiveness that they qualified for under the PSLF program?
not only blocked them, but delayed their payments and delayed their ability to pay off these loans and to not only pay off the loans, but also to get a loan forgiveness under the PSLF program.
So I'd like to ask both you and Ms. Yu, so if that's the experience that we have here, don't we agree that there needs to be extensive supervision, both by the Department of Education and the CFPB, to ensure there's not a repeat of the errors that hurt student borrowers?
Absolutely.
I would agree, along with attorney generals all across this nation. There needs to be a collaboration with all of the various agencies as well as the attorney generals.
Now, finally, today, 3.3 million private student loan borrowers owe an estimated $80 billion in loans that reference LIBOR. As the lenders transition away from LIBOR, I'm concerned about the lack of protections for borrowers in private student loan contracts. Ms. Yu, as lenders transition away from LIBOR, can private lenders choose a replacement reference rate that is higher, thereby potentially increasing the borrower's interest rate?
Yes, they can.
And how can Congress and regulators ensure that lenders choose a replacement reference rate that is fairest to the borrowers? For example, should the CFPB release guidance to private lenders as they transition away from LIBOR to ensure that borrowers aren't stuck permanently paying higher interest rates?
Yes, the CFPB must quickly complete its rulemaking related to LIBOR and encourage companies to adopt the SOFR, which is the recommended rate by the Alternative Reference Rate Committee.
Yeah, Madam Chair, this is an area where you could have a dramatic increase in debt as a result of the transfer away from LIBOR. And I have a real concern with the fact that, and this is the very last point I'll make, Ms. Yu, your research found that millions of borrowers who have been in income-driven repayment programs for more than 20 years, of that, only 32 borrowers have had their loans canceled through income-driven repayment. Is that right?
That's absolutely right.
And according to the CFPB, more than 90% of African Americans and 72% of Latino students take out loans to attend college in comparison to 66% of white students. Additionally, minority borrowers are defaulting on their loans at disproportionately high rates. What's the impact of IDR problems on borrowers of color who disproportionately rely on student loans?
Absolutely. The impact is that borrowers of color are paying more on their loans for longer, and this is robbing families and their communities of the wealth that they need to rebuild, to frankly, bridge the racial wealth gap.
Well, more for longer is not a phrase I like, Madam Chair, and less for less time would be a lot better. So thank you to all of our witnesses for your insights.
And thank you, Senator Menendez. Appreciate your partnership in this. We'll keep working on it. So appreciate it. Let's see if we can wrap up where we are on the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. So the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program was set up with a simple promise. Work in public service for 10 years, make payments toward your loans, and after a decade, your remaining balance will be canceled. But the federal government, with FIA's help, has failed to keep our end of the bargain. President Weingarten, let's go over some of the numbers here. You represent more than 1.7 million school teachers, nurses, early childhood educators, exactly the kinds of public servants who should benefit from this program. So I want to run through these numbers. How many people have applied for relief through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness?
So, Madam Chair, according to the Education Department's most recent data, about 322,000 borrowers have applied for relief.
Okay. And how many of those have successfully had their loans forgiven?
3,458.
And since you are a former school teacher, you can do the math on that?
I was a social studies teacher, but
That's no
very
excuse.
few, about 2%.
About 2%. And here's the part that you can bring to Congress to talk about it just one more time. You talk with your members. Why are they having trouble qualifying for loan forgiveness?
So this is, I'm really glad you asked that question, Madam Chair, because it was hard to understand, at least for me, it was hard to understand how teachers who very much follow the rules, like that this was, as Senator Ossoff said earlier, it's a pretty simple promise that for 10 years, in exchange for you paying your debt each month for 10 years, you would get the rest of it forgiven. So they would be, paying their debt. They'd be sending in a coupon or doing a Venmo or doing whatever millennials do now to pay debt. And it would get credited, and they would keep the forms. But then what would happen is that they would hear, well, it's the wrong loan type, or you're in the wrong repayment plan, or servicer A said this, and then after 10 years, servicer A would say, well, you have to go to the Department of Education to find out. You can't talk to us about it. And you would see these kind of two different islands of misinformation, because a person would go to the Department of Education and they would be told one piece of information, and then they would go back to the servicer and said, the Department of Education said A, and the servicer said, no, that's not true. So it's a labyrinth where you could be wrong by a cent on one payment in 10 years, and that could put you back to the beginning again. Wow. It is, I've never seen such a mess from a program that's supposed to be pretty clear and the promise pretty direct.
Yeah. Now, there are a lot of reasons for this 98% denial rate, this astronomical denial rate, including the complicated rules that Congress wrote. But a big part of the problem is that the federal government turned over the management of the program to a private company that couldn't do even the most basic part of the job. This company cheated public servants out of relief and, until recently, faced no meaningful consequences for its failures. Attorney General James, in your investigation, what role did you find that FIA played in denying forgiveness to public servants?
My office alleges in our lawsuit that FIA's failure to accurately count the public student loan forgiveness qualifying payments contributed to the, as you described, the shockingly high rate of denials, 98%, when borrowers apply for forgiveness. Again, the borrowers run the gamut. They're teachers, they're nurses, they're firefighters, they're police, they're librarians, they're even government workers. And when we filed our lawsuit, again, more than 98% of those applications were rejected. And these are individuals, again, who've made payments and unfortunately were turned down. And they made these payments based on the promise that was made. And so going forward, we look forward to working with the Department of Education. And we look forward to working with our other federal and state partners to increase oversight over these servicers. In addition, it's important that, again, we extend the pause, that we offer $50,000 in debt relief to student borrowers, that we reverse the previous administration's rules with respect to states being preempted by certain rules. And last but not least, that the federal agencies share information with state attorney generals so that we can collaborate and be partners together to protect student borrowers all across this nation.
Oh, that is very powerful, Attorney General James, and I appreciate it. President Weingarten, I want to also give you a shot at that same question. What do you think the Department of Education should do to make this right?
So first, the Department of Education has one of two choices. It could attempt to deal with 150,000 claims that are backlogged, to try to untangle every single one of these in every single place, or it could actually have a presumption that says, if you have been a school teacher for 10 years and you have some evidence that you've paid your loans, all the rest of the loans have been forgiven. And during this period of time, there could be a presumption that said that up to $50,000 of loans could be forgiven, which would be the preferable way, because then you could start from scratch and fix these programs and hold these services accountable and do the work that we need to do in the future to recruit and retain people in public service and say a promise made is a promise kept. But right now, it is such a tangled web. I don't know how any Department of Education is going to untangle the mess that Betsy DeVos left. So it would be the right thing to do, to deal with the wealth gap, to deal with what has just happened in terms of the pandemic, to actually say, let's cancel $50,000 of student debt and let's fix PSLF in the future.
Thank you. Now, President Biden has the authority to fix this problem today. I know the Department of Education has put out a call for borrowers' feedback, and I encourage anyone who's watching this to submit their stories to the Secretary of Education, Secretary Cardona. I hope that once the Education Department hears from borrowers, they will follow Congress's intent and simplify the rules of the program so that future public servants don't get lost in this maze. But let's be clear, we need wholesale forgiveness and we need it now. People have been cheated, they have been given the runaround, people have been harmed over and over and over again. The president has the capacity to make this right, and it's time to do that. I'd like to do one more issue before we leave today, so I'm going to reset my clock here for another 5 minutes and ask a final round of questions. Just weeks after the coronavirus pandemic started in March 2020, the Department of Education suspended student loan payments and collections and canceled student loan interest for every single student loan borrower. A Republican administration took this unprecedented step because borrowers needed help during a crisis. When he took office in January, President Biden extended this pause because millions of borrowers are still struggling to get back on their feet. But this payment pause is scheduled to end in just 2 months on September 30th. This is a disaster in the making. This student loan time bomb could drag down our entire economic recovery when it explodes. Ms. Weingarten, tell me how important this student loan pause has been. How has the pause on student loan payments, interest, and collections affected the borrowers that you represent?
So, sorry, Chair Warren, that I keep on telling stories of my members.
I want you to.
But this is, you know, it makes your heart break when you hear these stories and when you try to actually deal with this. So let me tell you about the story of Elise, who is a clinical lab tech at SUNY Upstate Medical University in Syracuse. She went to college, she pursued her career, and then she had lots and lots of student loans. This is her quote to me. "My husband and I drive a 10-year-old car. I can't buy work shoes, even though the ones I wear are contaminated with body fluids. I have to work overtime just to make ends meet. I'm doing work that I love and that people depend on, but my debt is a prison sentence that will haunt me and my family for life." What happened with the pause? It gave her the money so that her husband could stay home to care for her child because childcare had closed while she was working. It gave them some breathing room so that they could buy a new car. It gave them the breathing room so that they didn't have to worry every single month whether she was going to buy work shoes or whether she was going to pay her student debt. I hear these stories all the time, the kind of breathing room that it gave people so that they could navigate during this period of time. And even with that, you see the stress that my members are under. That's why we're so concerned that in a month or two, as schools are trying to reopen, as our job is to create a welcoming and safe environment, people are going to start stressing about what they're going to do again when they start having payments of $200 to $400 to $600 to $1,000 a month. And if we don't have a solution long-term for the debt, if we don't cancel that debt long-term, if they can't figure that out, then they're going to have on top of that this FIA transition and these other transitions, which will be also equally stressful because the paperwork is so bad already.
You know, the pause has been good for Elise, good for Elise's family, and good for our economy. Now, some people are saying the economy is improving, and as more people get vaccinated, we're getting COVID under control. That's true, and that is obviously good news. So they're wondering, why do we still need a pause in student loan payments? You've talked about this some, President Weingarten, but Ms. Yu, I want your organization also works with student loan borrowers. So let's think together about how prepared student loan borrowers are. Have these borrowers been told what their monthly payments will be after the pause ends?
They have not.
Have the servicers been proactively communicating with borrowers to help them get ready for a restart?
No, they have not.
A lot of borrowers' financial situations have probably changed in the last year and a half. Has the Department of Education made it easier for people to enroll in income-driven repayment plans or to update their income information?
No, in fact, the opposite. Many people are struggling with that.
And some borrowers are facing other problems. If a borrower is facing eviction or foreclosure, do you think that paying their student loans is going to be at the top of their mind?
Not at all.
You know, even before COVID, student loan debt disproportionately hurt people of color and exacerbated racial wealth gaps. These are the same communities that have been hit hardest by the pandemic. And as I said, the suspension is scheduled to end in just 2 months. So, Ms. Yu, what risks to consumers are you worried about if the repayments start on October 1st as scheduled?
Thank you, Senator. So we know that the economic recovery has not been even, and some of the most vulnerable borrowers are still struggling the most. We are very concerned about borrowers in default who are going to have their Social Security benefits immediately seized when the payment suspension ends. I'm very concerned about borrowers relying on their earned income tax credits and their child tax credits when next tax season comes. But we're also worried about the millions of borrowers who won't even know that payments have restarted because they have no contact with their servicers and will have trouble accessing income during payment, and then will fall into default as a result of communication failures and servicing errors.
You know, we talk about the borrowers aren't ready. The system is chaotic. The student loan servicers aren't ready either. When I asked them about their plans, one servicer described the complexity of the challenge as, quote, unprecedented, noting that, quote, the federal student aid servicers have never attempted to move 43 million plus accounts into a repayment status all at once, all across the country. Last month, I led 60 of my House and Senate colleagues in calling on President Biden to extend the payment pause at least until March 2020, to give borrowers, to give servicers, and to give the Department of Education more time to prepare. I am fighting to cancel $50,000 of student loan debt so that borrowers who are struggling can get permanent relief. In the meantime, borrowers are facing a financial disaster on October 1st. President Biden should act immediately to make sure that all borrowers are protected. I want to thank our witnesses who have been here today. I want to thank you for your testimony. I also just want to thank you for your work, your hard work in the trenches on behalf of people who are struggling with student loan debt. For senators who wish to submit questions, for the record, those questions are due 1 week from today, Tuesday, August 3rd. For our witnesses, you will have 45 days to respond to any questions. Thank you again for being here and sharing with us today. With that, this hearing is adjourned.